Okay, so here we are with the best yet to come, Douglas Rushkoff. I just wanted to say like 2 or 3 sentences about where we can take this from here. So 15 people have approached me and asked, so now I feel like really energized, and I heard from all these people, I met all these people, this is all impressive, interesting, but now what, right? And so how can we carry this on? And I think maybe Nathan and I don't have exactly matching visions of this, but some of it is matching. One of the ideas that, or suggestions that I have, and you should approach me if you are interested in that, is to create a foundation. A foundation that would bring together open source programmers to work on a kernel for labor platforms. So basically not replicating this effort all over the country, but actually creating one project that then can be applied with APIs to various different purposes, right? So there was interest of that. I discussed it with many of you already one-on-one, and there was definitely interest. So who hasn't heard this idea yet and you are interested, just sort of approach me and we take this forward. A second way is to continue to work with Civic Hall and to basically nurture this ecosystem that we saw here through more workshops and really trying to find also financial support for platforms that were presented here and that are emerging in New York City. So these are basically the 2 ideas that I can think of, apart from the obvious, of course, like a mailing list and staying in touch and keeping you all in the loop of what is to come. I will also publish a little book that's come out in like 2-3 weeks, just an expansion of this talk I gave on Friday morning.
Or maybe we should think, maybe we should think in terms of a federation, yes. Linking disparate efforts. I'm going back to Colorado tomorrow, and starting on Wednesday, really the process has already started, I'm trying to think about how to create a platform cooperative ecosystem there. And the way I do it there might be different from the way it might happen in New York, or the way it might happen in your community. But I think the challenge is going to try to figure out how to connect all of these efforts in all of our different places. That's a great adventure, and I think also it's an opportunity to think hard about how to build cooperative values into that process to make sure people most affected by these platforms are in the lead, and to make sure that we have the tools that we need to build them.
Okay, so now I ask Doug Rushkoff to come up. And I don't think really that Doug Rushkoff needs an introduction, but an applause would be very much in place. I will not give you the backstory, but we are incredibly grateful to Doug to agree to speak here tonight. It wasn't hard, and it was really a big commitment on his part, so we are incredibly grateful to him for being here and for talking to us tonight. And so with that, I hand over the mic to him. And I should actually plug one of his films from my time, which I show to my students all the time, and I think you should all see, is Generation Like, which I thought was a really extraordinary piece. So, Doug Rushkoff. Huh?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's a little intimidating to speak to y'all. First, because I've got a bunch of my mentors are out there from, Jerry and Mark Stallman and Richard and Marina, Paul Miller. I mean, it's weird. So hey, I'll treat it more like I'm having a conversation with you than that I'm lecturing to you, okay? Because I just don't feel, I do not feel worthy. And there's also, those of you who are actually doing things, which is also intimidating to me, because you're in the field actually practicing this stuff. So it's a little strange for me, someone who watches and thinks and comes up with models, to be lecturing to people who are actually in the field making stuff, making change, doing stuff. So please accept this as just my cheerleading of what you're doing. And if there's anything of value I'm giving you, hopefully it's arguments that you can take home with you and use against those who are naysaying your efforts or who don't understand quite what you're doing. If I can just articulate for you the stuff that you've been thinking and feeling, then I'll have done more than enough. Yeah, it's good. This is actually, as long as we're streaming, I'll let the world know. Yesterday I got the bound galleys for my next book, which is really about this. It's called Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus: How Growth Became the Enemy of Prosperity. And the title was inspired by, I'm sure you guys remember, in the late 2013, protesters were lying down originally in front of the Google bus trying to prevent their passage. You know, what people had realized was that their rents were going up because all of Google's employees were moving to San Francisco so they could live with cool people rather than down wherever Google was. And because they were all moving there, the rents were going up. And then Google, meaning good for the world, right, to make less pollution, they created a commuter bus, you know, a free bus for their employees to go, and they used however many less tons of toxic carbon monoxide and stuff to do it. But people were noticing then that rents were going up by 30% in areas where the buses were picking people up. So people who lived there felt like this big corporation that was supposed to be on our side. These were the good guys. Remember, Yahoo was the top-down bad guys. Google was the one who was aggregating user content in our links in order to do a sort of a bottom-up model for the organization of the world's data and all that, that they were just destroying the real world in which they lived. So I understood. And I remember the first tweets were coming through and people were saying, come on, retweet. Come on, this is great. We're bringing them down. It was right around the NSA stuff. So we were all feeling, you know, yeah, fuck Google. But part of me felt, I don't know, I feel weird about the people on the bus. I know the people on the bus. Howard Rheingold's daughter was on one of those buses, you know. She's a great kid, you know, and the programmers, yeah, they're making money, but you know the kind of burnout they have? They're just trying to make enough money in the, 36 months that they can work at Google before their life is, literally extracted from them. They're supposed to do their laundry there and stuff. It's crazy. So it's like, and then, a few weeks later, then in Oakland, people threw rocks at the bus and broke the window. And I was trying to figure out, who are we supposed to be mad at? Who is this war between? Is it the 99% against the 1%? Is it the residents of Google against these employees? Is the non-technological against the technological? Is it us against the shareholders? And each one of these people, I realized, didn't mean to be doing harm. Even the people who are running Google are thinking, well, now we've got these shareholders we've got to answer to, and the shareholders, quite frankly, are any one of us with a retirement plan that has a S&P 500 in it. We are those shareholders who are going to sell the damn stock if it's not going up because we got to retire on it. So who is the enemy? And I realized it wasn't really any group of people against any other, but humanity itself against an operating system that's gone out of control, against an economy that has been optimized for growth and then put on a digital platform where its worst features end up being amplified really beyond any of our ability to do anything about it. So it's not a matter, and most people think, oh, well, digital turns out to suck, right? Digital sucks because it's fucking up our economy. And it's no. It's not actually true. When digital first came around, if you think about the biases of digital technology, we weren't making any money with it at all. This was a shareware universe that we lived in. The thing that made the internet so confusing and sexy to Wall Street and the media and everybody was that we were all working for free. Right? We would make programs, whether it was in a university or a nonprofit or in a garage, people would make programs and be satisfied just for the fact that it was distributed and being used by other people. Shareware, freeware, it was an anti-economy, at least as far as the rules of the economy that we were used to. But then around 1993, 1994, Wired magazine came around and said, oh, you know what? this internet, it's not really this freeware, shareware, Mondo 2000 psychedelic fractal thing. It's the savior of the NASDAQ stock exchange, which had recently been bankrupted by the biotech crash of 1987. The internet became the poster child for the long boom, right? For the idea that now that we have the internet, the economy can expand infinitely, just like the law of nature, and just like the universe will expand infinitely. Don't worry, the markets will grow. Oh, wow. That's the perfect moment for a screensaver, isn't it? It was the screensaver. Right, so then Wired and the GBN and all of these great pundits talk to us about how the internet how it would work. And basically, we know how it works. You come up with some idea, you get a ton of investment money, then you flip it, and then who cares what the idea does as long as you got your money. And I remember, it all became really clear to me the moment I saw, Evan Williams, who was a friend of mine. I remember when he was starting Blogger and needed $300 to get through the weekend. I saw Evan Williams' face on the cover of the Wall Street Journal on the morning that Twitter had its IPO. And underneath his face was the number, $4.3 billion. Could you imagine just knowing someone who has $4.3 billion? I wanted to be happy for him. But to me, it represented the failure of Twitter. Because now Twitter, instead of being an application that helps people send 140-character messages to one another, now Twitter was the name on $50 billion of debt. So this was the kid, no longer the kid who provided us with an application to connect and do Arab Spring and Occupy and whatever we want to do. This is like the kid who was being rewarded for bringing some kind of gargantuan pumpkin to the state fair. It was this freakishly large, strange thing that was it was even wrong leverage for what the actual thing was. And now, Twitter, which makes $50 million a quarter, Twitter is considered an abject failure by Wall Street. Right? That's a problem. That's not the problem of the application. It's the problem of the requirement of the economy to grow. That's the only rule that we know. But it is a bankrupt model. It is a bankrupt, it just doesn't actually work. And you can make, and believe it or not, Wall Street, the Fortune 500, they know this. Deloitte showed in their shift index of 2011 that corporate profit over net worth has been declining for over 70 years. Corporate profit over net worth. What does that mean? It means corporations are really good at collecting money, but they're really bad at deploying it. Right? And that's a problem, right? They can sit and they can get really fat and really obese. I was at a conference for a major American soft drink company. And they had said, our growth last year was 6.7%, but next year we have to get to 7.3%. That's our goal. And they had all these executives shouting, 7.3, 7.3, 7.3. And I got up there, I was supposed to do this talk on communications and all, and I said, Jesus Christ, if you guys aren't big enough already, then there's no hope. Right? This is one of the most giant things. If they have to grow in order to survive, then something is wrong with this picture. Right? And what's happened is we've taken a 13th century printing press era extractive, growth-based economic operating system, and we're running it on a digital platform, and it's spinning out of control with a centrifugal force, essentially, of digital platforms, accelerates, it amplifies the features of this economic model, and then you get sort of end-stage apocalyptic style results. So I think the thing we have to do is to look at what was that economy programmed for in order to understand whether or not we want to embed those priorities, those commands, into the digital economy, which is increasingly going to be running on automatic. Right now, the first main value of the industrial age, and again, they don't really teach this in school, unless you're studying with Richard, The first main value of the industrial age was to remove humans from the equation. That's what industrialism was for, right? We had, in the late Middle Ages, we had the beginnings of a peer-to-peer economy. It was after the Crusades, people had come back from the wars, they had spices and technologies, they had seen the bazaar of the Arab bazaar, and they said, well, why don't we have marketplaces like that in our communities? And people began to trade at the market between each other, right? And they had, I mean, we can't get into it now, they had local currencies that they used, and they were the creators and exchangers of their own value. And they started to get really wealthy. The number of days they worked went down. It was a great and appropriate growth economy, because these were peasants, right, who were now becoming bourgeois, which we're supposed to look down on. They were becoming the middle class. Now, it was great for everyone except the aristocracy. Right, the aristocracy had lived for centuries just extracting value from the work of peasants. Now the aristocracy was getting poor as the peasants were getting relatively wealthy, as the economy grew. And they looked at that and said, we've got to get some of this growth for ourselves. Right, so the industrial age mechanisms that they implemented, namely corporatism and central currency, were designed to stamp out the peer-to-peer economy, to slow the velocity of transactions between people and get them paying up. So first, it's slight exaggeration, but only slight, small business was made illegal. Right? We invented the chartered monopoly. So now, instead of me buying oats from Richard, now I would have to buy oats from Her Majesty's oat maker. Instead of me buying shoes from Mark, I'd buy from Her Majesty's official chartered monopoly shoe company. Now the problem with this was the independent shoemaker now had to go work for Mark instead of making shoes. He didn't have his business, he had to go get a job. Right, these jobs we're all talking about, jobs were invented right around then. The only people who had jobs before that were basically slaves and apprentices. But now, we're going to have a job. So instead of me creating shoes and selling them, now I'm going to sell my time to Mark. Because now Mark got the official charter. Congratulations. So Mark got the official charter on shoes. So he gives a little bit of the investment back to the monarch, and now everybody has to work for him. And now Mark invents industrial age processes. Now, does he invent them because, he thinks he's going to make better shoes with these mechanical processes and having proto-factories? No, what he's thinking is, do I want to hire an expensive, highly skilled craftsman to make shoes? Or do I want to go to the Home Depot parking lot and get some illegal aliens to come in at 12 cents an hour? The latter. I'll take door two, Monty, right? So that's what they had the equivalent. They had unskilled laborers, so they can bring them in, train them in 15 minutes to put one nail into a shoe, and then they can't fight back. They can't ask for higher wages. You just replace them and get another one. So industrial age processes, mass production even, was really invented to alienate the worker from the value he was creating, or she was creating, right? And now, and it sucked, right? So people became employees. So, and we know the basic media story that came from that was because now we had mass-produced goods. I wasn't buying from my friends anymore in the marketplace. I was buying something out of a plain brown box. So then they had to come up with mass marketing to humanize that box. So they put a Quaker on those oats, right? So now I have a relationship. And to really embed that Quaker with mythology, we invented mass media. Right? Not because Lucille Ball was sitting in her cabana in Hollywood thinking, how am I going to reach the world with my comedy? No, it was so that the Quaker people could get that image into our heads before the box came and have a pre-existing relationship. So mass production led to mass marketing, which led to mass media. And the second invention, which central currency, well, we know what that was about. People had market currencies that were really invented in the morning, so just so that you could transact. Right, so the baker who knew that he was going to sell 10 loaves of bread that day could create bread receipts that then people could use during the day. He could buy stuff, and by the time they would come back to him, he'd give a loaf of bread or settle out. But the problem with that currency is nobody was making money on that currency. It was just a utility. So the wealthy, they actually hired some good financial advisors to figure this out. They thought, why don't we make all that currency illegal and force people instead to use, coin of the realm? Because now the wealthy who had money could make money by lending out their money at interest. So now we have an operating system where you have to pay back more money than you got. How do you do that? Well, you have to have an economy that grows. And this worked pretty well for a bunch of centuries of colonial expansion. As long as you had new people to take over, new slaves to hire, you would do fine. But it eventually it hit a wall. And we'll look at that in a minute and what we did about that. But the two main biases then of corporatism and central currency were to remove humans from the equation. So now we have digital technology, which originally could have put humans back in the equation, right? Digital means the fingers, right? These are the digits. You get back, we can start creating value again. Any kid with a laptop can sit at home with his pajamas and make a thing and send it out, and Etsy and peer-to-peer and Burning Man, yay. But what was the dominant form? What was the dominant use of digital technology? Was to continue the dehumanization of the marketplace. I mean, you look even the simplest uses when you take a hi-fi set, which used to have all these little pieces that you could pull out and solder and put together, and you replace that with printed circuit boards. What have you done to the local electrician who used to be able to fix that thing? He can no longer create value. Now, all best he can do is buy a new printed circuit board from the company. What happens when you take a car that used to, remember when cars had points and plugs and things like that? They worked. What happens when you replace that with a computer? Local auto mechanic, now he's either got to get certified and pay all this money up to the corporation, or just go out of business and let the corporation do it. So again, the person, the small businessman, the person who's creating value is replaced by corporatism. Or look at any example of the new mechanisms of the digital economy, whether it's, and we've all talked about, the Amazon Mechanical Turk, or the winner-takes-all qualities, the destruction of the music industry, the book industry, the journalism industry, pretty much every industry with the winner-takes-all stakes of these self-reinforcing leaderboards and recommendation systems. We end up in an economy that really values the technology for its ability to extract value from economies rather than technology for its ability to help people create and exchange value between each other. And you look at Google, which nothing against Google. God bless you, Google. They could hurt you, so don't say anything. But you look at Google, and what are the final embedded values now? That they hired Ray Kurzweil as their scientist. And what does he believe? He believes that humans are only important insofar as we can bring on the singularity so that the computer can think for itself. That's not the value system I want at the very center of the behemoth of the digital age. Right? So humans, where do humans fit into this new economy? Really not as creators of value, but as the content. We are no longer the content creators. We are the content. We are the data. We are the medium, if you will. You use a smartphone. Right? As you use the smartphone, your smartphone gets smarter, but you get dumber. Right? It knows every stroke, every time I touch this thing, it knows more about me and my data. That's what's being extracted. When Jay-Z gives us a free album and we stick it on our phone, sponsored by Samsung, it turns out that he gives it to us for free because our money is not worth as much to him as the data he can then sell to Samsung's marketers. So we are the medium. Now, the thing that's bankrupt about that model is everything in this Google data Facebook model, everything comes down to advertising and marketing. Right? But no time in history has advertising and marketing represented more than 5% of GDP. But how can we then have the entire NASDAQ stock exchange based on ad serving? It won't work. In the end, if everything's supposed to be an ad, if I talk for the ads, if every service that we do is just for the ads that we can sell on top of it, who is left to advertise? Right? It's a snake that eats its tail. Right? So we're running a digital economy on this extractive colonial economic value system. And it worked. In some sense. It worked right up until World War II when we got into post-colonialism. And that's when Eisenhower said, well, look, we're going to need another way to make this work. And they thought technology, right? We've run out of territory, we've run out of slaves, we've run out of banana republics, but technology will increase the surface area on human beings and create a new territory, which is, this human attention, or human data. And you look at the digital era companies, and they're really just running chartered monopoly software in digital form. So we all know, Walmart is what? Walmart is a conquistador of territories, right? They go out, they create monopolies, and then they close stores and force everyone to go further to get to it. We all know their system, right? To take over regions and extract value. Walmart's like a vacuum cleaner in that sense, right? So what's the modern equivalent is Amazon and Uber, right? Amazon doesn't care about books. They just want to own a vertical so then they can hop over with a monopoly to the next one. That's the object of the game. Or Uber, right? What is Uber but an effort to monopolize the taxi cab thing in order to hop over? You think driving is their thing? We all know that they're going to move into their competition is UPS, for God's sake. It's the logistics of the entire planet. But in order for their models to work, they have to achieve an absolute monopoly so then they can hop over to another vertical. So where corporations used to use their charters to exercise monopoly power, now they use, as Trevor would tell us, now they use the platform to do it. So whereas before it was the law that enforced the monopoly, now it's the technology itself that enforces the monopoly. And you talk to the CEOs of these places, and luckily, because I don't put marks in my books, I get to do that, right? If they can do a mark search, you're just out of the corporate loop. It's funny. But we're speaking amongst friends and YouTube. You talk to these guys, and they'll say, well, I'd love to switch, but my shareholders are demanding growth. And that's the same thing that happens to these poor kids. They have a great idea for a startup, and then they end up, they leave college when they're sophomores and take this money from some incubator or Y Combinator or whatever. They get all this money, and they replace their great leftist teachers with rightist venture capitalists as their new mentors, and they learn to pivot. And pivoting means leaving the thing that you were going to do and help people and turning it into a disposable company that gets an IPO and an exit, right? So it's not actually creative destruction, it's destructive destruction, right? It just go and destroy a marketplace. So then you look at Twitter and you think, well, gosh, Twitter, fine. So they disrupted journalism or disrupted communications, but then they go to the biggest, baddest industry of all, the one the most needing of disruption, and go, Daddy, at Goldman Sachs, get me an IPO, right? Where instead these very same technologies could be used to disrupt those bad guys for their own good. So the question then, thanks, is why are we optimizing for growth over anything else, the growth of capital? How have these companies become literally software that extracts value from the working, transacting economy and converts it into static bags of capital and share price? How has that come to happen? And that's really because central currency is the embedded operating system, right? It was created for a growth economy. It was created so people with money could grow their money by having money. And it was a way of gaming transaction. We talk about, we can gamify that to make money. The economy was already gamified, right? This was transaction and value between people that got gamified with central currency into something else. So then the people that want to make money in this game are going to play the game, not be down at the bottom of the totem pole, creating value. That's the sucker's place in this. Right, the place you want to be is up here. That's what General Electric learned really in the 90s under Jack Welch. They could sell a washing machine to someone and make maybe 20 cents on the dollar, or they could lend money to someone to buy a washing machine and make 40 cents on the dollar. So they sell the washing machine industry and they become a finance company. And that worked really well until the crash. Right, so what these corporations are doing, digital and pre-digital, is converting land and labor into capital. That's the object of the game. That's what Uber's doing, taking places and people and converting it into money. That's what Airbnb is doing, converting land and labor into capital. Right? So digital companies are really just software created in order to do that. And if you start a digital company and you take any capital at all, now your obligation is to create a home run, a 100x return. 10x return isn't enough. That's a failure. Right? So once you get into that game, you're in that game. So what's the alternative? The alternative is, instead of optimizing the economy for growth, we optimize the economy for humans. Right? And this is really hard to think about, because it forces you to challenge some of your underlying assumptions about what an economy is for. So people that are on our side say, oh, well, we got to figure out how to create more jobs, Obama's always on that. Jobs, jobs, jobs. Jobs is good. Jobs is good. And even in our labor thing, we're talking about jobs. Wait a minute. Let's just pretend we're on acid for a minute and say, who really wants a job? Right? They're all thinking, the YouTube people are thinking, oh, he's talking about being lazy. He's talking about being lazy. No. What do we want? We want food, we want shelter, we want a sense of meaning, we want to contribute to something, but do we want a job? No. We understand that a job is an artifact of a Renaissance-era scheme to prevent us from creating and exchanging value ourselves. So no. We don't need to optimize for jobs. And really, we have, certainly in America, we have more than enough stuff. Right? We burn food every single week in order to keep market prices high. Bank of America is tearing down homes in California that are in foreclosure. Why? To keep market prices high. We can't just let you live in it. Why? Because you don't have a job. You don't have a job. Right? So what are we going to do? We have to create a completely unnecessary industry that now taxes the topsoil or the environment somehow, so that and creates worthless goods that we're going to have to market to people and somehow convince them to buy and ruin their lives with them, whatever it is, in order for you to have a job. You're not allowed to share the lawnmower or the snowblower with your neighbor, because then you're not making enough snowblowers and there's not enough jobs. Right? That is ass backwards. Right? If there's actually enough stuff, then we really can talk seriously about, minimum income and really simple ideas. If there's enough food to go around, then why not let people eat it? If there's enough shelter for people to live in, then why not let people live in them? And then if they want to really get a special house or foie gras, whatever the heck they want, let them, sure, they can write video games for other people to play and, create another entertainment economy on top of that. So in optimizing for humans, first, stop looking at jobs. Stuff is way more important than jobs. When you look at the corporation, so you say, okay, if we want to optimize a corporation for human beings, instead of optimizing it for growth, what do we want to do? Really what we want to do is retrieve some of the ideas of, thank you again, Richard, of John Stuart Mill, who talked about growth is cool, capitalism is cool, until you've grown to the point where the economy has reached its carrying capacity. When you reach your carrying capacity, you move into more of a steady state economy. So then instead of worrying about growth, now you start looking at the circulation of money. You start thinking about it. Gosh, people don't grow forever. You get to 6, 7, 8 feet, that's enough, right? Then what do? You make another one, right? You make another person. You stop growing. Even a coral reef. Everyone uses these terms, ecosystem. Oh, the Uber ecosystem, the iTunes These are not ecosystems because they destroy. Right? Ecosystems are sustainable. Uber's not an ecosystem. The people who are driving are doing R&D for automatic cars. That's what they're doing. They're doing the R&D for the technology that will replace them. And because they don't have a platform cooperative, they're not going to be included in that. Well, shoot, if they were shareholders, if the drivers even own 10, 20% of that company, then it doesn't matter. Then when the company succeeds after them, they're still participating in the value they created. Right? So a steady state corporation would look at the difference between a board game and a fantasy role-playing game. Start playing an infinite game with a business. How can this business sustain itself? How can it go on forever even? How can it continue? What's a sustainable business look like? And you see, actually in family businesses, you see some people who are willing to experiment with long-term interest. Family businesses care differently than regular ones do because it's their family name on the thing. They don't want to screw other people over because that's them, their kids, their grandkids are going to have to live with the reputation of what they've done. They're also thinking about their business as the investment. right? The object is not to collect enough cash in your stock value so that your kids can live off that. It's to create a sustainable enterprise that your kids can continue after you in generation after generation after generation. And family businesses actually do better long-term than major corporations do. They don't do as well in sudden expansions. They don't do well in extremely speculative moments, but they do much, much better in downturns. And that's because they're embedded in their communities. They're embedded with their vendors. And they're even willing, and this is just perish the thought, they're even willing to help others create value. That's the real trick for a business to develop an ecosystem. It's to think of its vendors and its customers as people that it has to keep alive. Otherwise, you lose them. God, even a fascist like Henry Ford understood that. That you've got to pay your workers enough to buy your product. Otherwise, you're really totally screwed. Right, so you actually help others create value. And what we do is we move from kind of a growth model of business to a flow model of business, where we optimize for the velocity of money. Right? And that's where some of our new currencies are coming in that are thinking about exchange. And I'm more excited really about amplifications of the let systems and time dollars than I am about Bitcoin and the blockchain. Where Bitcoin is terrific in the sense that now we can authenticate from the periphery. We no longer require a central authority to authenticate. So the whole reasoning behind a central authority, behind a central bank is taken away. Right? The bank wasn't really there to secure our transactions, right? The bank was actually invented to extract value from our transactions, but they used the idea that they were there to authenticate our transactions as the reason why they took all that money. But now that we can see that we can do this with our cell phones, that rationale is taken away from that argument for their existence and their extractive nature is taken away. But really, you have to ask when you look at Bitcoin, what are they programming for? Right, what are they programming for? Are they programming for velocity of money and for exchange between people? I keep hearing people say that Bitcoin creates trust in a new way. Bitcoin substitutes for trust in a new way. And that's a tricky thing. But it substitutes for it. And it's not to say the blockchain is a worthless technology. It's not. I mean, PGP wasn't, although it turns out there was something bad in there, but that's another story. PGP had that mole thing in it, whatever. It wasn't really what we thought. But the trick for us as enthusiastic digital people is in seeing something like Bitcoin and the blockchain through this kind of techno-solutionist lens, as if what we can do is kind of reprogram a digital economy somehow perfectly so that everything works out. And it just doesn't work. In the end, what we really have to reprogram is our social expectations of one another. What does it mean to engage? Everyone on my block is really happy to lend a lawnmower or a snowblower to someone else, but everybody's afraid to accept it. Now, why's that? That's because they're programmed. If you accept a favor from someone else, now you owe something. There's some sort of sense of obligation to another. That's called community. Right, that's a good thing. The reason why we bring brownies and things to people when they move into our neighborhood is not because they need brownies or a meatloaf. It's so they have an excuse to pay us back. It's to bring them into the fabric of favors that actually creates a peer-to-peer reality. So what I've been doing, and I hope you guys can do this too, is thinking up and then pitching a variety of experiments, I'm calling them, to the powers that be. Right? Convince them that there is some chance, they're all into risk avoidance, risk management, there's some chance that the peer-to-peer kind of a thing we're talking about might actually happen. Right? There's some chance that this extractive economy that Deloitte has shown is going away will actually go away. So what they need to do is begin to experiment with hybrid solutions to the problems they already have. So you look at an institution like a bank. Right? What a bank can do to begin to participate in more distributive circulatory models would be, Joe, the pizzeria owner, wants to borrow $100,000 to expand his restaurant. So the bank should say, rather than we'll give you $100,000 and then you pay it all back or we'll kill you, what they should say is, look, we will lend you $50,000 if you can crowdsource $50,000 from the neighborhood using this secure system that we'll just give you for free as a utility. That's an easy one, right? So now the pizzeria then just has to ask customers, well, if you give me $100 towards my renovation, you can have $120 worth of pizza when it's done. So the community member gets a 20% return on his money in less than a year. The bank gets community buy-in. The pizzeria owner has now established new community relationships, and the bank has also established itself as something other than the extractor of value from a neighborhood, but the facilitator of local transaction and community development. Or you look at a company as badass as Walmart. What if they took one shelf, right, one shelf in the store and dedicated it to locally produced goods? One shelf. Is that going to threaten the whole thing? No, but it's actually going to help create a local economy. I mean, all you have to do to pitch that to Walmart is say that Walmart needs to do economic development in its target communities because the target communities are going bankrupt. They're all on welfare. How can you do that is by stimulating a local economy. Or a supermarket can give over its parking lot to its competitor, to the CSA, the Community Supported Agriculture Group, do a farmer's market on weekends. Let them rent space from your parking lot if you really have to monetize the damn thing. And then at the end of the day, when they haven't sold all their goods, you can store it on your shelves and then have a great halo of selling locally produced goods. Or you can talk about bounded investing. You know, bounded investing is something the labor unions figured out. The steel workers figured this out. They had all this retirement money. And they figured out, where are we going to invest it? Where are we going to invest it? And someone got the bright idea, why don't we invest our retirement money in projects that are going to hire steel workers? Duh. Right, isn't that good? So now they take the money and they invest it in projects that create jobs for their workers. And then they thought, why can't we do one better and invest it in projects that are steel workers our union members are going to build them and then actually live in them. So people creating their own homes for money and their own retirement savings. So it's a matter of teaching companies how to earn the same dollar 5 times in a bounded economy rather than extracting $5 from the economy and leaving it bankrupt. You know, that's not that hard. You know, teach startups to take less money. You know, even the Silicon Valley show on HBO understands that. The less money you take, the more of the company you have and the less you have to pay back. You know, and of course, you know, the most exciting one thing that we're talking about today is moving from platform monopolies to platform cooperatives. Actually letting the people who are creating value on your platform own the platform or part of the platform. Get the platform as thin as possible. Get the app as tiny as possible so that it's facilitating exchange between people rather than extracting from the exchange, which is the only thing that people seem to know how to do. Now, what I'm arguing for, and I think is the only possible turn of events for this kind of stuff to happen, would be if we are living through a full-on Renaissance, a Renaissance of 12th, 13th century proportion. And I would argue that we are. You know, look at the original Renaissance. What did they get? They got perspective painting, they circumnavigated the globe, they invented the individual, essentially, you know what I mean, the self, Faustus and all that. They got the printing press, they enclosed the commons, and they invented sort of science of division. So what are our equivalents to those? Okay, perspective. Well, perspective painting did what? It allowed you to see 3 dimensions on 2. What do we have? Well, we have the hologram and the fractal, right? Which basically allow you to see, if you move past a hologram, it allows you to see 4 dimensions in 2. Or a fractal, you get self-similarity, where you begin to see the dimensionality. It's actually fractional dimensionality. You know, and everybody today is talking about, oh, can we have a fractal model of distribution in Bitcoin? Yes, we can, because that's our Renaissance. Instead of circumnavigating the globe and creating a culture of conquest, what did we do? We orbited the globe and took a picture of it, thanks to Stuart Brand. He said, why don't you take a picture of the damn thing? We took a picture of it, and then what did we get? We got the environmental movement, because we realized, oh my gosh, this is one sphere that we're living on. So instead of the individual hero, what did we get? Well, we got collectivism. We got fantasy role-playing games. We got collaborative narrative. We got the internet. Instead of the printing press, we got the computer and the net. Instead of enclosing the commons, we end up retrieving the commons and through shareware. Instead of getting a divisional science, we get a science of holism. You know, so I do believe that we can justify this moment as a renaissance. But the beauty of a renaissance is, what do? Renaissance. You rebirth old forms in a new context. The idea of a renaissance is that it it retrieves the values that got repressed the last time out. So what got repressed the last time out? Peer-to-peer, community, the land. For what? For centralization, for empire. That was what the Renaissance, that was literally what was reborn, was the values of ancient Roman Greece. So what do we rebirth? We rebirth the values of the peer-to-peer bizarre culture. And we see little cultural hints of that. That's what we're seeing in Burning Man. That's what we're seeing in steampunk. That's what we're seeing in Etsy and crafts and home-brewed beers and all. It's as if we were retrieving medieval culture right along with medieval economic values. And the people who actually talked the most coherently about this were the Catholics. Go figure. The popes were asked for a response, really, to Marxism. And they were kind of between a rock and a hard place. They didn't want to go with the Marxists, and they didn't really want to go with the capitalists. They saw there was sort of, it's great, the rights of the individual laborer, that's kind of good, but people should be free to make money and invest and do all that too. And they came up with something that was later called distributism, which really meant that rather than worrying about redistributing the spoils after the fact, what we have to do is distribute the means of production to people. Right? So the shoemaker can own his shoemaking stuff. Right? Or the Uber driver can own part of the platform, although they didn't know about platform monopolies back then. And the other big idea they called subsidiarism, which meant that no business really needs to be bigger than it needs to be. Right? That businesses should only grow as they need to in order to accomplish the task that they need to accomplish. And after that, let someone else do it. Right? You only need to grow to a certain size to be sustainable. And these values, which actually Francis is hinting at again. It's like he's read it. These values really couldn't be fully realized until we had a digital distributed technology in order to realize them. And that's the promise of a digital economy. It's not the runaway amplified growth of digital industrialism, right? But the sustainable creative capacity of digital distributism, which is really what platform cooperatives are leaning towards. The factors of production we've always understood the factors of production as land, labor, and capital, and sometimes entrepreneurial effort. Land, labor, and capital, though, are the biggies. And right now we're living in an economy that rewards capital, but what about the land and labor? What about the neighborhoods where Airbnb is operating? What about the people who are driving the Uber cars? Right, the opportunity we have in a renaissance of this proportion is to retrieve land and labor, right, and to put them right alongside capital as partners in an economy, which is what they are. It's really not fair for the people who are putting the money in to reap all the value, because money is not the only energy is not the only factor of production that we're seeing in our economy. The beauty of being in places like this, and I really do like coming together as live humans. The beauty is that in the real world, as opposed to online, in the real world, human beings have the home field advantage. We actually do. This is why corporations of the industrial era are so happy to go online, because we no longer have the advantage there. We're not there. We don't have our flesh. We don't have our reality. We don't have all the stuff, all of the solidarity that is created by humans in real space together. So I believe that our opportunity as humans who want to redirect the economy towards human ends rather than the needs of abstracted capital that's serving nobody, is to reboot the economy itself for distributed prosperity. And we can do that one person, one business at a time. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. I want to acknowledge also that Doug came to be with us at some sacrifice for him and his family, so we really appreciate him being here, and I think this is an enormous contribution. Now, following him, I I'd like to introduce someone else who also needs no introduction, Astra Taylor. But I would like to say a little bit. I had the chance to meet her first while she was making really important films about philosophy, and I was writing a little red book about God, and then reconnected again the first day of Occupy Wall Street, from which she went on to create a platform for people to organize themselves and recognize themselves as debtors and debt resistors, now doing battle with the Department of Education. And in the midst of all that, she wrote a book with a title that really captures the ambition of what's brought us all here, The People's Platform. So I give you Astra Taylor.
All right, hello everybody, or good evening. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, Nathan and Trevor, for inviting me. And Douglas, you are to me what all of the mentors you listed are to you. I remember watching Merchants of Cool, the pre-generation and that having a big impact. I think people should watch it as well because it shows how some of these problems carry over through new mediums. Anyway, it's a real pleasure to be here at a tech conference where, as my friend Susie Cagle tweeted yesterday, quote, "Everyone takes the extractive nature of platform sharing for granted." Actually, Susie said it was weird to be in such a place, but I think she meant weird in a really good way. I'm responding, I'm not quick enough to respond to Douglas's comments off the cuff, so I actually am responding a bit to what I've seen at the conference and to Douglas's book, because I actually gave Douglas's book a blurb, and I think I'm not quite professional enough. I haven't gotten to the stage where I just give blurbs without reading. I still read the book all the way through, and it was really good. I read the book, and so I'm responding to that, so I'm going to give you a sneak peek at some of the stuff that he writes about. In his talk and in the book, Douglas makes a rousing case for a less extractive, more cooperative economy, and I think it's the perfect moment for this kind of intervention. It's exactly what we need. He makes the case that the digital technology makes the dream of a fairer world more possible, and I hope that it does, but I think the jury is still out on this. So this is something I just want to discuss a little bit. I think that there was just as good a case for a cooperative economy in the industrial age as there is in the digital age, right? People were working together in the factory. Why shouldn't they own the means of production, right? I don't see how the case is that much stronger today. There were obstacles then, and I think there are obstacles now. Those obstacles may have shape-shifted a bit along the way. And those obstacles are why I fear that the metaphor of reprogramming society might be a little bit misleading, just because it makes it sound a bit more easy than I think it's going to be. The powerful definitely do not want us to reboot things, and I think they will go to great lengths to stop us from doing so, and they'll use brute force or they will use bureaucracy. And here I'm thinking, a few months ago, I was having a conversation with Brewster Cowell of the Internet Archive, and he was telling me about trying to start his new credit union. And one thing he said, if you want to see aggressive banking regulation in action, like the kind we don't see, that we didn't see in the wake of the financial crisis, then we just have to look at the National Credit Union Administration, because they are the aggressive watchdogs that we wish we had in the regular financial sector. So I think there are all sorts of obstacles. So I think we just don't want to underestimate the resistance that a true economic makeover would face. And so I guess if there's one thing I sort of want to express at the end of this conference, is that I want my cooperativism, whether it's platform cooperativism or something else, I want it to be confrontational. I think it has to be to really make a difference in the world. So we need a kind of inside-outside strategy. We need the building of cooperative alternatives on the margin and the challenging of existing structures at the center. So I was thinking about this in terms we want cooperation, but we also really need non-cooperation. And I mean non-cooperation in the sense of nonviolence, right? As a sort of active stance that says no to the existing order too. And by emphasizing the need to not just create alternatives, but to also confront the powers that be, I'm echoing longstanding concerns. This is also not anything new. At least since Beatrice Webb's The Cooperative Movement in Great Britain, which was published in 1891, certain trade unionists have suspected that cooperatives are a kind of cop-out or a way to dodge the hard realities of class struggle. And as Douglas notes in his book, I'm sure it was discussed here, even a giant like Mondragon, a giant network of cooperatives has to make some concessions to globalizations, right? And of course, small cooperatives do as well to stay afloat. They have to play by the prevailing market rules on some level. And it's not to condemn them at all for making these compromises. It's just to say that that it's something to be aware of, and sort of figuring out how this non-cooperative spirit would manifest is really vital. So again, thinking about how new are the ideas we're looking at, because one thing I'm always very interested in this issue of how much change is afoot, how much continuity, how different is the current moment. And I think it's instructive to look at past cooperative efforts. Since the earliest outbreak of labor unrest in the United States, workers have dreamed of getting rid of their bosses, running businesses by themselves, and changing the world as a consequence of that. And I think it might historically be one of the first moments of labor unrest, actually. But here in New York City, way back in 1768, 20 journeyman tailors walked off the job intending to start a cooperative, right? That was one of the first strikes. And history doesn't have a record of whether they were successful or not, but that was definitely their intention. And many people followed suit. In the 1880s, the Knights of Labor represented more than 200 industrial cooperatives, which they hoped would serve as the basis of the cooperative commonwealth. There's also a rich history of Black cooperative economic development, and it's worth reading this book by Jessica Gordon-Everard, which is called Collective Courage. Have people seen this book? Yeah. Yeah. So there's the Colored Farmers National Alliance and Cooperative Union, which had over 1 million members in the late 1800s. Du Bois wrote Economic Cooperation Among Negro Americans in 1907. There were consumer cooperatives promoted by the Ladies Auxiliary of the Black-Run Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. It's a remarkable history that I think is really worth going back to and studying. My point is that there are lots of lessons of cooperative startups, and unfortunately, there are almost an equal number of cooperative failures. And the stumbling block each and every time, almost each and every time, not only, is access to capital, is the question of finance. And this I really learned through conversations with Brendan Martin of the Working World, who is presenting here, and I'm not sure if he's in the audience right now. So I suppose somebody might say, like, this is going to be less relevant in a digital age because you don't need expensive machinery or something, and the internet's cheap. But I think hopefully we can agree that this could very much be a problem. Because on the one hand, yes, we agree that corporate platforms are massively overvalued, but we also agree that they cheapen things, right? That's part of the problem too, is that they cheapen things that should be paid for, right? People's labor. So you get rid of the overvaluation, but you start paying people something fair, and we've got an expensive proposition. So my point is simply that cooperatives cannot totally sidestep the economic system that provides the preferred incentives that shape the corporate platforms that we all have problems with. Getting rid of bosses and shareholders is a great first step, but it's just the first step, and you might still need somebody to extend a line of credit to you. So that brings me back to Douglas's book. He recognizes that the project of creating cooperative enterprises is inseparable from creating a financial system that is not predatory or parasitic, but productive, generative, not extractive. And this is something I really loved about the book and really appreciated. Along with this, he really articulates why we need to start experimenting with alternatives, alternative currencies and the like, and different models. But again, I would just emphasize the element of cooperation and non-cooperation too. In addition to experimenting, both with other business models, other banking models, I think we need to confront the existing financial structures head on. And people who saw my presentation on the panel, my presentation on the last panel, where I spoke about the debt collective, won't be surprised by hearing me say that. Because finance, in addition to putting cooperatives at a disadvantage, is what's driving much of the inequality we see today. I said this earlier too, which is, there's the idea that the robots are eating our jobs, but the statistics don't seem to bear that out, right? Like what is, and the robots are also blamed for increasing inequality, right? Which is a way of blaming workers, that they don't have the skills to compete, and therefore it's sort of their fault. And the things that are driving inequality are the massive profits, the massive salaries of people who work in the financial sectors, and the massive salaries of CEOs. So those are two of the main factors, right? And I think we need to tackle the financial question head on, and hopefully, once we have our cooperative revolution, that will get rid of the problem of extreme CEO pay, right? That will be taken care of. Another thing I guess the question though is, the question of, another concern is the question of scale. And there's a tendency to valorize the small, the local, and the decentralized. And I think that's something that we need to keep debating. I think the small is going to be extra challenging in terms of platform cooperativism. And Douglas mentioned network effects and winner-take-all dynamics. That's something that you wouldn't see, for example, on the web pages of the local food co-op, right? Every town has its local food co-op. But once the ambitions are to build a platform, then we're going to have an incredibly difficult time getting traction against these other services. So I think the small, it might be, this question of persisting while small might be actually something that's more challenging in the digital space. And it's also a value that I just think we need to question on its own terms. And this is something I really appreciate about Douglas's book as well. Because he definitely likes the small and the local and the human, as we should, but he also has a really complicated take on things. And to go back to what you just said about blockchain, in your book you say, no matter how promising the blockchain's applications may be, decentralized technologies don't guarantee equitable distribution. The Bitcoin project was solving for peer-to-peer verification with anonymity, it was not solving for economic justice or even the healthier circulation of currency. Applause for Douglas. So again, decentralized technologies don't guarantee equitable distribution. And I think we really need people like you articulating that and pointing to systems that do. And I think your insight goes well beyond Bitcoin. Decentralization in general does not always mean distributed power. And this is something the political theorist Wendy Brown is very insightful about in her book on neoliberalism called Undoing the Demos. She calls this kind of non-progressive or reactionary decentralization devolution. And I think it's a term that we should start using more. I think it's useful. She says, and I quote, devolved power and responsibility are not equivalent to thoroughgoing decentralization and local empowerment, she writes. So she talks about how we kick these problems downstream to small bodies that can't really handle them, like climate change, like poverty, right? All of these problems just get sent downstream to little, this is devolution, it's not decentralization in the way we want it. But sadly, the kind of decentralization we tend to get. So this brings me to one of my final points, which is that I think, as much as decentralization sounds nice, that centralized public options need to be on the table and thought along with decentralized, cooperative, commons-based ones. And we need to think creatively about how they could complement each other and how they could be combined. And I'm thinking about even Janelle Orsi's idea of Muni B&B, which was in one of our roundup that we published at The Nation, related to it was about tech alternatives. This is one other area in the book I would slightly push back, because you mentioned that there hasn't really been a push for welfare, state-style solutions, welfare solutions in the wake of the financial crisis, or for regulation from government. And I think actually that's really changing. Like the political winds are changing. We all know that there was a poll a few years ago, right, where the kids decided they liked socialism, right? And there was just one the other day, and it turns out that big D Democrats like it too. An overwhelming number of Democrats voting in the primary have a positive view of socialism. So something's really shifted, and I think it opens the space to think about state solutions, but also to creative ones that actually have a cooperative element. I don't know, I keep thinking we just really need to rebrand taxation as crowdsourcing, and that's okay. So I was very struck looking at the Commons program, reading Douglas's book, by how many cooperative experiments are happening right now. And I think connecting the dots of all these experiments is so important because it feeds the sense for all of us that there's a zeitgeist, right? And we need to believe that so we can perpetuate it. And a couple of years ago when I was finishing my book, The People's Platform, such ideas felt really distant. They felt completely hypothetical, purely conceptual. And so I wrote a conclusion to my book in the standard format where I suggested a lot of things that sounded good to me. You know, I was like, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see cooperatively run iTunes and cooperatively run film distribution networks. You know, as an independent filmmaker, I'd love that. But I did not reflect at all on how exactly my grand designs could be put into action. And I love, you know, and my editor even told me I didn't have to. She was like, no, you can just say these things should happen and you don't have to tell people how. And I was like, really? But since releasing my book, I have become more of a political organizer. I've gotten much more involved in organizing debtors and doing that kind of work of how do I put my theory into practice and realizing how hard it is and being humbled by that process. And it's made me a bit more impatient when people say we should do something without reflecting on how to do it. So given that, I want to just share a bit of simple organizer advice. And it's not really from me, but it's from someone I met recently, this woman, Elaine Brown, who's in her 70s, and she who is in her early 70s and also led the Black Panther Party when back in the early 70s when Huey Newton was in Cuba. And I just finished a short profile of her that should be on the New Yorker website soon. She's sort of less known than her flashier comrades, but she has been a tireless organizer over all of these decades. And in 2013, she founded Oakland and the World Enterprises, which will eventually be a network of what she calls, quote, cooperatively owned businesses. She puts the emphasis on ownership and not on working or workers, because she thinks that will just appeal to the people she's trying to recruit more. And these businesses will be run exclusively by former inmates. And and that's because these are the people, she believes, who really, really need to own their jobs because they have an even harder time finding work than everyone else. So right now she has a fully functional organic farm in West Oakland, but she has plans for a cooperatively owned grocery store, fitness center, nail salon, and tech incubator under 5 floors of affordable housing. And you know, what's holding her back from completely manifesting this vision is capital, of course, though she has raised over $300,000 by partnering with the city. So I think it's another great example of a sort of municipal cooperative collaboration. Anyway, my point is that Elaine told me in no uncertain terms that you never organize or mobilize around abstract principles or by having the smartest analysis or by having the best argument, right? She told me that when the Panthers organized their free breakfast program, they didn't say, you have a right to nutrition, and here's my argument as to why you have that right. They fed people. And then people went and demanded that schools feed their children because they said, if the Panthers can do it, then the school can do this. Likewise, she doesn't motivate the project's farmers with ideology or treatises on cooperative economics, but rather allows them to recognize how much better it is to share in the prosperity created by their labor and to be treated like true partners. And this was really clear to me when I spent the day at the farm talking to people. And doesn't this hold true for all of us? Journalists, wouldn't you like to not be treated like disposable providers of work-for-hire content? Programmers, wouldn't you like to have a say in what you build and why, and own the fruits of your labor? So I think those of us who want the principle of platform cooperativism to spread should take a lesson from Elaine. We need to let go of abstraction just a bit and address concrete concerns. How will it make people's lives better? How will it address their real needs? How will it feed their families? How will it make them feel more connected? Or maybe actually we need to ask those questions of ourselves. How will it make our lives better? How will it address our real needs? How will it feed our families? How will it make us feel connected? Because when we can actually demonstrate that and really know that it's true, I think we'll have a much easier time of spreading these vitally important ideas. Thank you.
So how are you? You tired or you still have half an hour in you? Let's hear it. Yes? Okay. All right. So let's do a question and answer with maybe, so I ask Doug and Astra to come to the stage. Maybe, I don't know if we can, oh, wonderful, magic. Okay, so yeah, just take these seats, and we have mics down here. If you want to come down, ask the question. It's good for the record, so that it can be recorded, forever. You can give us your social security number. Okay. Steve wants to start, yeah? Right.
Testing.
Yeah. Sorry.
Well, that was a breathless tour of history, for starters. Appreciated the scope of your scholarship. It's good to entertain the idea that the Middle Ages were better than what we've been told. Though I have to say that there is one authority that I think would somewhat dispute your characterization of the Middle Ages. I'm thinking of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where things seem to be nasty, brutish, and short without the communes that some of the people in that movie were trying to achieve. But anyway, I mean, here's the thing. I want to look at people in the audience, too. I mean, I've been going to conferences like this for many, many years, and there's always a lot of great ideas floating around. And what I've sort of learned is that unless you can come up with a concrete plan, and even, I would say, a good discipline for people who are putting out ideas, and I would throw out, how many in the audience are professors here? Must be a number of you. I would suggest that a good discipline for you and your students is to make them put their idea down into legislation. Because if you can't distill that idea into a piece of legislation where you can hope to get 50% plus one of the votes of the legislators, or if it goes to the ballot, 50% plus one of the vote, you don't have anything. Because at the end of the day, you've got to change the laws, you've got to change the regulations, or if you don't like doing legislative, electoral, but I'll tell you, the left doesn't do enough in that area. I mean, I think what Astra was saying, that, the types of things they're doing on debt, there's something concrete there. And you have to turn it into something concrete, because I've gone to so many of these conferences, and there's so many great ideas. Social forum, many great ideas floating around social forum. But at the end of the day, it's can you turn the tide in terms of the institutions, the laws, the regulations, because those are the things that guide us all, that make us who we are.
So let's hear back. Let's hear what Astra and Doug have to say.
Comment on that?
That's the thing. I mean, so the problem right now is that legislation and capital are kind of one and the same. Which is going back to history, the monarchies wouldn't have happened without corporatism. The charter monopolies built the monarchs, and the monarchs built the chartered corporations, and it's true to this day. When people in San Francisco want to try to change the law so that not all the homes are being rented out, Airbnb spends, what was it, 100 times what was raised against them. So, I mean, yeah, law, it's cool to change laws. Don't get me wrong, but laws still exist on the abstract level. It's just whether and how they're enforced. Yeah. Usually, the kind of legislation I like to see is, like, I belong to a CSA that bought a new field and wanted to grow chard and broccoli and stuff on it, and they found out that it was pre-regulated for corn only by some corn lobby thing, because it was getting a kickback from the government for growing nothing, but you couldn't grow anything else. So we had to go to the state legislature and get it changed so that we'd be allowed to grow chard on it. But, by golly, we put the chard seeds in there before getting approval.
I also think if we limit what we think of and argue for to what would actually pass legislatively now, we will be so constrained. We know that the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act, right? These were laws that were unimaginable, or the ADA, unimaginable a few years before they passed. So we have to. It seems a bit like a faux realism to say we have to only talk about what is actually achievable in this moment with the representatives we have. We want to be ahead of the curve. At the same time, I do want to discuss ideas and have some, personally, I want to have some plan of how I could actually have them get traction, especially if I'm going to talk about boring shit like finance, because if it's totally just playing mind games, then I'd actually rather just go play the guitar or something else.
Yeah, at the same time, you know, just in defense of the artists and thinkers and writers out there, I mean, there's different roles for different people. You know, if one person's going to write the beautiful anthem that motivates people to march, and that's fine if they do that, you know, from their apartment, from their bed, from their laptop, from their wheelchair. You know what I mean? So there's different roles for different people. The tricky thing I've been seeing, a lot of emails I get are from people who want to create the website that will aggregate all of the people who are doing the blah. You know, they want, oh, we're going to be the clearinghouse for this. We're going to be the network that organizes that. And a lot of them, I want to say, why don't you just do the thing rather than become the clearinghouse for everyone that you imagine who wants to do the thing. Just do the thing. So there's a little, because of the net, we have a little bit of a tendency to want to scale up our idea rather than just executing it. And I think that's one of the dangers of the bias of the technology.
Okay, well, let's maybe hear from the other side too.
So thank you guys. You know, Douglas, you know, with the media ecology background that you have, you know, and talking about the bias of communication and Innes and all of that, I think that's a really good reference to actually just call out for folks who aren't familiar with media ecology and Innes's work. But so about being confrontational. We're talking about governance. Most of all of these conversations that I've been in the past day, 48 hours were about different types of governance debates. It's technology, but we realize, oh, there's really governance questions. So I guess to me the question is then, you know, ideas gather. We're at a university. Ideas do matter, you know, so what gathers people, what we attend to is what we build. And what becomes boring to us, then we don't, you know. And there are other factors, but it seems to me like we're at the end of the Reagan era, right? And to me, well, the beginning of government is the problem, right? This sort of catch-22 voodoo.
Writing area?
Of the Reagan.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay.
I thought he said writing
So-
era.
We thought you said the end of the writing area.
No, Ronald Reagan.
Because
Government is the problem, you know, there is no alternative.
Yes.
And do you think that we can actually say that we're there, like what seems to be happening in England to some degree? You know, we're just there. How do we make that idea more exciting and to get people to, yes, get involved in, I would say, city government? You know, not everything is fully bought. There's a lot of battles on the local level or where we can build up. But how do we make that exciting, or is that too soon?
I don't know. People seem to be less motivated by being excited for something than they are about being irritated about something else. You know, so every time I see some news about the economy doing worse or some other big bankruptcy or joblessness, I think, well, this might, you know, rather than pushing people into despondency, eventually it'll get people mad because they want food and shelter and heat and stuff like that, and it's all available, you know. So, I mean, we work both ends, you know. You sing a good song about, you know, where it can go, but then also, hopefully, I mean, my whole strategy has been to try to expose the underlying operating system, to try to expose what are the underlying assumptions that have been embedded into our world and get people to see, oh, wait a minute. You know, it's just like when you walk, if you're raised in New York, you think that cities have grid plans just because that's what cities are. I did, and not till we went to Europe, I'm like, oh my God, you can do a city that's round? You know, so the underlying assumptions have to be kind of, you kind of have to be opened up to that to see this is there, you know, this is there by design, not by nature.
I mean, I don't know. For me, even, I feel like I've been on the left for a long time and studying theory and philosophy, and it's only actually just dawned on me how exciting the idea of participating in local government would be, how much influence it would have. I mean, you could win a few district attorney spots across the country and have a big impact on criminal justice stuff. I mean, it's not, I think this is maybe a shortcoming of the intellectual left. Like, a lot of people don't know, we are big picture thinkers, is it fair to say, but we don't know a lot about certain details. And maybe we don't actually always know what's possible. And and then don't know how to make the case for it and why it could be so exciting and profound. And so this is why it has been such an interesting education for me to get into the woods with debt and finance and to learn about regulation and law and how to really push the envelope in those fronts, because it's very different than the sort of big picture theorizing. But I think there is a lot of potential in that realm, and it can have a national impact, either because people do something that's very sort of brazen or because people follow the example. So
Yeah, and they're
I'm
just
agreeing
great-
with you.
yeah.
I just agree with you.
They're proof of concept. I mean, and then there are things like the Rolling Jubilee, or is Sarah Horowitz still here? I mean, gosh, and she just did it. So it's like there are nerds in action now. Which is kind of exciting.
Hi. So I really like this analogy of flow economy, and I was thinking then that maybe we already have a solution for that. So how does it look? So if in traditional economy, current economy, we have to pay back, maybe in the flow economy, we just have to start paying forward. So when you get a loan, you shouldn't be returning it. You should be just giving it forward to somebody else. And with that, we could get this flow or circular motion.
Right. I mean, and that's partly how, a demurrage currency as opposed to an interest-based currency works. The grain currencies lost value over time because the grain store had to be paid, some of the grain was lost. So every month or 2 months or 6 months, if you had your $10 of grain would now be worth $9. So it was people spent it. So it was pre-programmed for spending and distribution rather than hoarding, because you don't want to be stuck with something that's losing value. Negative interest is coming. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think you challenged us both to rethink everything around us and ourselves. And my question is a two-part question. One is regarding local global connections and your thoughts on that, because what's happening here is also affecting what's happening in other parts of the world, everything from resources, water, et cetera. So just your thoughts on how we need to keep that in mind as we go about exploring what we're doing and how we're collaborating. So the local, global. And then the second question is regarding journalism in this age, investigative journalism, and how there can be more of that, because it's not necessarily being supported by current media structures. And I know that through blogging and other software, there's definitely more empowerment, and we live in an information age, but I really question the value of information we're all actually getting. Thank you.
So maybe we can also hear one more question from this side, and then you answer both of them. And because I feel this urge in the crowd to go and have drinks. So let's hear one more question over here, and then maybe you answer both of them, and then we all go and get wasted.
Okay, well, first and foremost, I just want to say, Doug and Astra, I'm a huge fan. It's been a real pleasure. I'm DJ Spooky. Astra, I've been a huge fan of your films. I had a quick question. I mean, if you go back to the 14th Amendment, which I was bringing up the other day, that's when corporations attained personhood based on the back of the post-bellum introduction of African Americans into personhood as well, which I always chuckle over.
Welcome.
But what's up?
Welcome.
Yeah, yeah, we're not 2/3 of a person. Hey. So what I would love to hear you guys comment on for a quick moment is, here we are with this notion of enabling the conversation, right? We're making the case for alternative platforms, but above all, so many people have to get over this idea of implicit bias in the technology. I mean, earlier today were some really good interviews about and discussions of the way user interface conditions, user response, limits options, and so on. So what would you say is a new interface that you guys think about for the next 5-10 years to get people to rethink about the takeaway from today, like how we all, I think this is a group of catalyzers, and I think that they're pretty into what you're talking about. But I'd love to just distill it down, and then just say how you're thinking. Just would love to hear a little more of some of the thoughts on both the media. I mean, we're in a presidential election cycle where, for example, the Republicans say they're using fear tactics. Donald Trump is insane, and Ben Carson, God knows, thinks that the pyramids had wheat, So I'd love to hear just like some of that like intervention. So yeah, but great talk, thanks.
I mean, my answer to both questions kind of would be, to make, use these technologies to make reality more apparent, more transparent, so that you can see. I mean, what would it be if you were operating a cell phone and could see the fact, apparently, that the cell phone is using 2 refrigerators worth of electricity? I mean, not the cell phone itself, but all the stuff that the cell phone is asking for when you're streaming video and all what's going on. You're using that much energy. So is it worth using that much energy? Can you use a Macintosh laptop? And can you see the slave labor, that went into making it? How can you make that visible? There was a great site called slaveryfootprint.org. You remember this thing? Where you type in, like, oh, do you have 1 car or 2? How many bedrooms? And then at the end, you've entered in all this stuff. It shows you how many slaves are working for you. So how could, these technologies should make the sacrifice of the planet and of labor apparent to you as you are operating them, so that you can make more, conscious decisions about, whether it's worth it. Just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's not costly.
Okay, I'm going to run through the questions really quick. On the local, global front, I guess I'm not quite sure what direction she was going in, but I think one element, what we have is a situation where capitalism is global, democracy isn't, right? We have these sort of overarching economic structures. And so when I think in that sense, every local fight is global. And this was really put in relief for me being in Greece recently and thinking about Greece in relation to the Eurozone and the sovereign debt crisis, right? So here I am helping to organize this tiny little for-profit debt strike with students against the Department of Education. And then here's a whole country, and they don't have leverage against their creditors. Right? And what it showed was just the way people need to come together and have collective action, we actually need now countries to come together and have collective action. So I think in that sense, when you're talking about economic issues, you are actually engaging in a global fight. Journalism, we need to save it. I think we need to explore state subsidies, frankly, because countries that have more state investment in journalism actually have more of a free press, blah, 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 blah. DJ Spooky's question about interfaces, I don't have actually like a broad general thing like that, but I guess my general insight would be that as an organizer, we're trying to actually create a collective identity, right? So for students, with the student debtors we're working with, we're trying to create a shared identity. Instead of people talking about the situation that got them individually into debt and what happened to them, we're trying to have them become a group. So I think platforms that create a sense of shared identity are really important. If we're addressing political structural problems, we need a place that we can be that together and not just have it be about our personal profile and how many likes and that feedback. Another thing that I would love to have made, if anybody wants to give me some venture communism, is a radical version of all of these financial platforms that help you manage your finances and be like a good, a good financial citizen, right? So they help you get back on track and pay your debts on time and get control of your finances and balance your budget, right? It would be really interesting to have shared a sort of politically conscious cooperative economic version of that, where people could act in concert and see themselves and see the power of their income or their debts combined. So a sort of collective version of all these sites like Mint or whatever.
People,
that would be cool.
People really need to experience the benefit of mutual aid, even in the tiniest ways, so that mutual aid becomes the default setting through which we look at the world. Most of us now, we can't help it. We think, how much money do I have to earn in order to insulate myself from the bad shit that's coming? Rather than what can I do to make the world a place where that bad shit isn't going to happen? And that's a really hard, how do you unwind that? No, it's okay, you won't need it because it's going to be okay, because we're all going to be helping one another. And that's That's something that we can build into almost everything, but it's got to be built into the micro moments, even of us. And I know we talk the talk, but it's really hard to walk the walk in the individual micro decisions that you make every day. And those are the ones that spread out. Those are the ones that end up making a difference. It's really I think we can do it from social behavior up, because then the way we live, the way we experience ourselves and one another just won't be consonant with all these rules and all these companies and all this stuff that we're expected to do, and will force change.
Okay, so this is the moment, right? So it's been many months that my collaborator Nathan and I sort of put this together. It's been extremely exciting period of time, and so now I would love for us to sort of take this energy that all of you really have brought to this event and sort of take it out of this door and make it count, and let us stay together, right? Let us stay in touch. So we will invite you to a mailing list to keep you in the loop, and hopefully many other events will come out of this at the New School and all over the country, and hopefully also abroad. So thank you to all of you. You really made the contribution here. You've been really amazing. You brought an amazing energy.